I'm Caroline Hyde. This is the best of Bloomberg Technology, where we bring you all our top interviews from this week in tech. Coming up, the resistance continues. 120 tech companies take a stand as San Francisco becomes ground zero in the fight against President Trump's travel ban. Plus, no Trump bump for Twitter. Shares of Twitter plunged this week after earnings as the company's US user base remains flat. All the details ahead. And Intel places its $7 billion chip. We take a look at why the presidential bet on Arizona is perhaps not as fresh as it may seem. But first, to our lead. The epicenter for the international debate of President Donald Trump's immigration policy is right here in San Francisco. The case took on increased business importance this week as 120 companies, including many of the biggest tech companies from Apple to Facebook to Google, filed a legal brief condemning it. Leaders from the tech sector were among the first and most outspoken critics of President Trump's executive order on immigration. Why? Well, perhaps because many of the companies that define US tech today would not exist without immigrants. Here's a quick recap. My colleague Corey Johnson caught up with Sukhinder Singh Cassidy for more. She's the founder of the e-commerce startup Joyous and a former president of Google's Asia Pacific and Latin America operations and former advisor to Twitter.
I think if you look at the history of some of the most famous tech companies, we just saw it, and of course there is a lot to look to in terms of the data historically. But even today in Silicon Valley, over 58% of the highly skilled workers here, are immigrants. So when you step back and look at our labor pool, right, the source of innovation, it is sort of has been bred by openness and an open immigration policy that lets the best and brightest minds in the world flow easily into this country.
And the notion of non-comprehensive immigration reform, that is, which has been a Republican argument, right, which is more H-1B visas. We'll keep the people crossing the Mexican border illegally out. Let's let the people we want in. Let's let the people. Donald Trump has spoken in Trumpian ways about the people that are going to do good things and make us money. Let's let them, and let's keep the other ones out.
Well, of course. I mean, it's easy to say that in theory, but in practice, these are very broad brush strokes, when in fact, there's very little data to suggest that U.S. terrorism has been founded by the companies and by the countries that are, whose people are being kept out. So I think if you were to say innovation comes from...
You're taking the argument that the 9/11 bombers were from other countries like Saudi Arabia.
Right, but if you look at more recent terrorist acts, you can speak to people who've been actually born in the United States, right? And are homegrown terrorists. Right. So if you look at sort of solving terrorism on the one hand and a broad brush swath that says immigration, has to be stopped from these 7 countries, and by the way, innovation won't happen from anybody who comes from these 7 countries, I mean, it's fairly ludicrous to suggest that keeping these countries out will somehow keep America safe. The converse is not true, which is when you create broad policies that keep out innovation, right? And us from accepting the smartest and brightest people in the world who are willing to come and build companies here on which the entire U.S. economy will prosper, there's a large argument in favor and very little data to suggest that any of the people here are responsible for the recent acts of terrorism that we've seen.
John Doerr from Kleiner has been saying for at least 15 years we should staple a green card to every single degree coming out of Stanford because we want those people to start companies here, not take them back to China, wherever else they might have come from to get that education.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the ironies in all of this is Donald Trump talks about being pro-business and about making America great again. One of the ways to make the American economy great is to have great companies started here. not in India, not in China, not in Canada. But if you want to have a great and robust U.S. economy, it starts with fostering innovation here. And that includes having an open immigration policy.
So let me ask you finally about H-1B visas. It's an important issue to Silicon Valley, has been touted as such. But in practice, the H-1B visa program has been a little more abusive is too strong, but there have been certain companies that have cobbled together lots of H-1B visa programs. Some people have complained that those people can't actually go around and find other jobs because their ability to live in this country is basically stapled to their ID card, where they can't leave and go somewhere else and pursue gainful employment elsewhere. I wonder if you look at that as a program that's necessary or needs reform.
Well, I would say to you, the H-1B program is absolutely necessary, and I happen to be one of those immigrants who started my company based on the fact that I got here through an H-1B and converted through an EB-1, which is an extraordinary persons visa, and that allowed me to actually leave the company who bought me here and to go start my own company. So, in companies large and small, my company is much, much smaller than Google and benefits from H-1Bs. So I don't think it's a case where H-1Bs go disproportionately only to the large companies. I mean, let's put it this way: it allows you to find a way here.
As an open critic of the Trump administration, AOL co-founder Steve Case has voiced his disapproval of Trump's ban. Yet, this week on Bloomberg TV, he also discussed some of the changes we need to see here within the US, regardless of any change in policy. Take a listen.
One of the reasons President Trump won is a lot of people in the middle of the country feel left behind. They aren't seeing the benefits of innovation, including the benefits of job creation, and there's a reason why that's the case. Last year, 85% of the venture capital went to the states that Clinton won. Only 15% went to the states Trump won. Over 30 states in aggregate only got 15% of venture capital. California alone got 50% of venture capital. So what's happening is the venture capital are funding the disruptive companies in places like Silicon Valley that are creating new technologies that often disrupt and destroy jobs in the middle of the country, but we're not offsetting that by backing the entrepreneurs in the middle of the country so they can create the companies and create the jobs in Pennsylvania and Ohio and Michigan and these other states. That has to change, what we call the rise of the rest. We need more capital flowing to more entrepreneurs in more places and level the playing field so everybody everywhere has a shot at the American dream.
That was AOL co-founder Steve Case. Now, President Trump's proposed immigration policy continues to make waves here in the US and indeed abroad. Yet our next guest says the ban would be fantastic news for China and another US tech competitors. Bloomberg Gadfly columnist Tim Culpen, usually based in Taipei, joins us right here, right now, and still with us is David Kirkpatrick of Techonomy in New York. So, Tim, hit us. Why is it fantastic for China?
Well, basically, you think about it, it's Tim Cook's job and also, the job of Satya Nadella and all the big leaders of US tech companies to hire the best people from around the world, no matter where they're from. They're not going to limit themselves to the US. Now, if they can't get those people to come in here and work in, say, Cupertino, they're going to have to sit them somewhere else. And we've seen this through the H-1B process. The visas take a long time, and I know for a fact that Apple, for example, has had people sit in other places like in Japan waiting for visas. So they sit there and they work away and they do what they're supposed to do before they can get to Cupertino and work here. Now, if they're going to stop, if the US government is going to stop more and more people from coming in, at some point leaders in the US tech companies are going to say, you know what, let's just put more people overseas where we don't face that problem. One of those places will be China, absolutely sure of it, because Apple, for example, has already set up an R&D center in Shenzhen in southern China. They have R&D centers elsewhere around the world. And if there's going to be problems and they can't really plan for when their staff can get into the US and work here full time, they're just going to say, well, you know what, let's just put them somewhere else and work there. That's bad for the US because then, of course, local hires in places like China or Japan will learn from these people who are being hired by, employed by US companies, but they're going to learn from them and work alongside them and then can take that knowledge to other companies in, say, in China or in Japan. And that's really not going to be good for the US.
And build an ecosystem elsewhere. David, are you hearing from the companies you talk to, the leaders that you're talking to, that they're thinking of expanding, say, Microsoft's Canadian R&D center that they've already had? Are you expecting some of this talent to remain abroad?
I think it's early for that kind of, radical move. But I think Tim's expressing a legitimate set of concerns that many of us have about what could happen to the tech industry if these immigration attitudes continue to get more and more restrictive, because that's really what it's all about. And companies generally, and tech companies in particular, benefit tremendously from more open immigration. In fact, I mean, there's an article today in the New York Times about how the entire economy's growth would be dramatically increased if we had more immigration broadly. And immigration and migration is generally believed by economists to be an almost unmitigated positive for economic growth.
Still ahead, despite President Trump's being a big fan, well, Twitter still finds itself stuck in neutral. Sales growth was paltry, user growth also missing. More on Thursday's earnings report next. Plus, a 30-year NASA veteran is leaving the agency for Silicon Valley. Alphabet? Nope. SpaceX? Nope. It's Uber and flying taxis. We'll explain. This is Bloomberg. Twitter says it's getting tough on harassment with the latest updates. The social network is rolling out new changes to combat bullying by hiding abusive content and preventing banned users from creating new accounts. The updates are part of CEO Jack Dorsey's push to clean up Twitter. They follow years of criticism that not enough has been done to curb abuse and harassment. And speaking of Twitter, well, shares tumbled this week after reporting quarterly revenue and profit outlook that missed analyst estimates. The social network is having trouble luring advertisers and users to the platform. It added only 2 million monthly active users in the fourth quarter. That's just 0.6%. This deceleration in user growth is causing advertising sales to sag. Now, keep in mind that ads represent nearly 90% of Twitter's revenue. And despite the media attention over President Trump's frequent tweets and the lead up to the 2016 election, Trump's impact on Twitter, well, CFO Anthony Noto acknowledged on the investor call Twitter's lack to capitalize on the attention.
We can't quantify any impact at this point in time, but we'll continue to analyze it as we go through Q1 and talk to you at the end of the quarter.
We spoke with Bloomberg TV editor-at-large Corey Johnson and James Chuckmark, analyst from Monness Crespi Hart, for more.
The daily actives are improving, and they are getting better engagement from those users on their platform. But at the end of the day, I think Twitter needs to decide what it is and what it isn't. They're trying to, continue this MAU growth story, but it's just not happening. And when you're going through all the biggest world events with Donald Trump now in the Trump administration utilizing it as their primary communication tool to the world, and still not seeing any improvements in the conversion rates. Because what we do know, they're getting at least 2 million new visitors coming to their site every single day in some capacity. And they're not able to convert those users. And ultimately, I think the rocky road ahead is just about to get even rockier.
Get even rockier, Corey. Dig into some of the key issues that you've been seeing here. You've notably also been doing your own analysis, particularly on some of the dilution that's happening in terms of shares.
I think what's interesting here also is in the midst of this inability to grow users, inability to grow revenues, revenue per user was notably better, but they're giving a lot of stock options out. And it's a very different business from an income statement point or an earnings per share point, just because they're giving away so many stock options. The stock compensation for this company is at massive levels, and the result is you've gone from a company that IPO'd with about 363 million shares that now has 714 million shares out there and continues to have this massive stock compensation expense, such that if it were not for all this stock compensation, the company would be profitable. Now, there's an accounting argument, and it's a valid one, that says this is a non-cash expense, that they don't actually have to spend to get these options. But the result is that there are so many shares hitting the market, and that you see this company, sort of the insiders of the company becoming enriched, whether it's people who are selling their businesses to Twitter or insiders who are just getting more and more shares with every knockdown in price. But the result is it's really flooding the market with shares, even as investors are sort of stuck holding the bag.
James, is that something that's making investors bristle? Is it something you as an analyst are keeping an eye on?
Yeah, of course. And at the same time, you're seeing all these other all the tech peers moving away from a kind of a non-GAAP measures toward more of a kind of kosher GAAP reporting basis, which includes the stock-based compensation expense. So, that is something to scrutinize, especially when you consider that 20% of their expenses are essentially revenue is in the form of stock-based compensation. So, it's something that does involve more scrutiny. But at the same time, I think...
And actually, James, let me just back up. I mean, it's my take that when a company does an IPO, you expect to see a lot of stock comp in the initial income statements, but that it should drop off after the IPO because all the shares issued before the IPO are no longer being expensed. But these guys are still issuing shares.
Yeah, they're issuing shares, and really, no one's putting their money where their mouth is. I mean, you go through the conference call, right, and there seems to be so much confidence in the metrics that they're reporting and belief that this turnaround in DAUs is going to drive a much bigger turnaround story for the company. I don't know where that confidence is coming from. And you know what would be good to put their money where their mouth is and actually buy back some stock. For instance, if Jack Dorsey said, I believe in it today, I will buy my shares today. We're not seeing that. It's a lot of rhetoric. The results aren't matching. And I think they really need to look in the mirror. What are we? What do we want to be? Who do we want to serve? And how do we do it? And answer those questions.
But James, one way that they are trying to hint that they're doing it is via video. They're going to be striking more partnerships. They're going to have live video, in particular, front and centre. Can they manage to get that target of profitability by this year via the joys of video or not?
I mean, video's a double-edged thing. I mean,
did you just do that?
Look, video. I'm so exhausted from giving the benefit of the doubt to Twitter. Look, with video, you have to think about it this way. Every incremental dollar of video that you get comes with a higher cost associated with it because you have to acquire and license that content. And if they move into more and more premium categories, you know, those costs, their cost structure could change from the one that, you know, people believed in at the time of the IPO. So, and at the same time, and who else is going after video? Well, you have Facebook going after video, Snapchat going after video, YouTube going after video, and Twitter with its 319 million users. Good luck. And one point on that, on the 600 hours of video that they had in the fourth quarter, only 31 million users, unique viewers, watched that content. I mean, come on.
And we, here at Bloomberg Technology, explored the dynamic between Twitter and the Twitter president. What are Twitter's user numbers actually telling us since the US election? President Donald Trump's use of Twitter is unprecedented for a world leader. Consider his audience. The president's personal account, @RealDonaldTrump, has roughly 24 million followers. Compare that to his neighbouring leaders. Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto has 6 million, and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau with less than 3 million. Barack Obama's personal account has 4 times as many followers as Trump, but half as many actual tweets. Trump built his campaign around the idea of speaking frankly and directly to people, and Twitter provides the ideal platform for this. He's tweeted more than 240 times since Inauguration Day, often directing that day's news flow in 140 characters or less. Sometimes it's to share his schedule, sometimes to discuss foreign affairs, and sometimes none of the above. But with all of the added attention that the president's brought to Twitter over the past few months, is the company attracting new users? Not according to Comscore. Comscore reported that Twitter's mobile app users actually fell more than 6% in November from the year before, and 5% again in December to 45 million unique users. For context, Snapchat has 82 million in the same month. Facebook, twice that. Trump's spotlight on Twitter hasn't helped investor sentiment much either. Shares are flat since Election Day. And on the days that Trump tweets something particularly engaging to users, well, Twitter is not usually rewarded with a bump in the stock price. For example, his most popular tweet by likes and retweets last month was this one from Sunday, January 22nd. Liked by nearly 400,000 users and retweeted over 83,000 times. But when trading resumed the next day, shares closed nearly flat. UBS and Pivotal Research both downgraded Twitter from buy to hold last month, citing, among other things, muted growth among monthly average users. So if Twitter the company is not benefiting from super user President Trump, who is? Perhaps democracy? Still ahead, Uber is actually researching floating taxis. We'll talk to the man who literally wrote the book on Uber's flying cars. And later this hour, we'll meet the makers. We'll head to the 2017 Makers Conference and catch up with AOL CEO Tim Armstrong and BBG Ventures' Susan Lyne. This is Bloomberg. Tired of that morning commute? Well, Uber may have a solution in the works. The company has hired Mark Moore from NASA, naming him Director of Engineering for Aviation. The end goal, to develop flying cars. Bloomberg editor-at-large Corey Johnson sat down with Bloomberg Technology's Brad Stone for more details.
If you're a science fiction fan, the idea of a flying car or even a small aircraft that takes off and lands vertically, that runs on electric power, that maybe one day is automated, is just cool. So a little background. 7 years ago, a guy named Mark Moore at NASA wrote a paper, he's from Langley, about the feasibility of this. There's a Stanford professor named Elon Crew. He started talking to Larry Page. They eventually spawned two companies. One is Zee.Aero, one is Kitty Hawk. Ashley Vance and I wrote about these companies. They're very secretive.
Kitty Hawk.
Kitty Hawk.
Which is a noted name in the world of aviation.
Of course, the Wright brothers. So we wrote about these two companies that are working on so-called flying cars. Uber, at the end of last year, wrote a white paper saying that they wanted to play a role in this new ecosystem of flying cars, not necessarily build a flying car themselves, at least not yet, but they think they have a role to play in changing regulations and in negotiating with suppliers and creating new, say, battery technology. My story today is they recently hired that guy from Langley, Mark Moore, who wrote the paper back in 2010. So adding a lot of firepower. This is very real. Silicon Valley is working on it. You will be soaring through the airs to your job one day, maybe not soon, but perhaps one day.
Or not.
Or not. Good.
But I do think it's really interesting that Uber is a company that has taken, and you write about this, but it's a company that could have been all cloud. I don't mean cars in the clouds, but I mean a company that really takes the advantages of other people do the hardware, where the cash is transacted. And instead they're doing things that they very easily could have left to others. And I wonder what it is about the mentality of this company that is, on one hand, is all about leveraging the cloud and using Amazon Web Services on the back end and using consumers' phones on the front end, but still sinking a lot of money into development of actual hardware like cars.
Well, I think there are two explanations. One may be positive, one a little more cynical. The cynical explanation is they worry that this will happen without them, that Google would develop a driverless car, or Zee.Aero or Boeing would develop a flying car, and they don't need Uber. So one, Uber needs to be involved in some way, or they risk being left behind.
Disintermediated.
Yeah. On the other hand, you invent the future you want to see. It's the same reason that Amazon, developed the Alexa, developed the Kindle. If you want to see a future, if you want to solve real problems in cities around transportation, then you have to be involved in advocating for it. And I think Uber has the resources to do that.
Well, it's just interesting. They've sucked up all the AI and robotics engineers out of Carnegie Mellon, right? Then they're sucking up these guys who are developing these. It's interesting the cherry picking of academia.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's funny because Google, got a lot of criticism for the big bets, right? Doing these things in house, and one by one they've been spinning them out. Driverless cars, actually now the Waymo division is obviously very central to Google's plans in transportation. But these flying car projects they decided to do outside the company, and now here Uber is developing at least some capability in house.
That was Corey Johnson and Bloomberg Technology's Brad Stone. And be sure to check out Brad's new book, The Upstarts, How Uber, Airbnb and the Killer Companies of New Silicon Valley Are Changing the World. Out now. Coming up, Intel becomes the latest firm to talk up its grand ambitions with President Trump. But is it a case of deja vu? We'll have the details next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can now listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the US on Sirius XM. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to the best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Caroline Hyde. Now, Intel says it will spend $7 billion on a production facility in Arizona. The announcement came amid a meeting between Intel CEO Brian Krzanich and President Trump at the White House. Krzanich said the investment expands Intel's presence in Arizona and will create 3,000 jobs. Yet, the investment was already included in Intel's capital spending forecast, and the plant's construction was already started. So, why the announcement now? Bloomberg editor-at-large Corey Johnson caught up with Intel Executive Vice President Stacy Smith and asked him, well, why the company is focused on building in the US.
If you think about our footprint as a company, so first just to put us in perspective, we tend to be, among, 1, 2, or 3 in the world in terms of our capital spending every year. We're 1, 2, or 3 in the world in terms of our R&D every year. So we're huge. The majority of that investment is in the U.S. We do invest all over the world, but the majority of it is here in the U.S. And the reasons that we invest in the U.S. is, first and foremost, we can hire great people here. We have really good infrastructure, and we have access to worldwide markets. So while we build our capacity in the U.S., 80% of our sales are outside the U.S., so that's really important to us. We do all that against a disincentive of, the U.S. has among the highest tax rates in the world, and so we're actually disadvantaged relative to our competitors in Korea or Taiwan, and that's a place where we're obviously working closely with the administration to try to get a more pro-investment policy such that it makes more sense for us to continue to make these kinds of investments here.
Is $8 billion about the price tag on a fab these days, on a top-of-the-line fab for Intel?
Yeah, so we're starting with a shell that's been built. We have some work to do on the shell, and then to outfit it and get it, into full production is another $7 billion. I'd say if we were starting from, just a piece of land, you're probably in excess of $10 billion to build one of these factories.
Wow.
So
and time horizon?
Really
What's the typical time horizon? I visited a fab up in Hillsboro probably 2 years ago, and it's just jaw-dropping. And I wonder, though, in terms of the time that it takes, okay, you've got the shell, but if, again, you were to start with sort of vacant land to completing this kind of fab, how long does that take?
Yeah, it's kind of from start to finish, depending on where you are, whether you have a shell or not, it's, 3 to 4 years. It could actually be a little bit more than 4 years. To put it in perspective, in addition to the direct employment that we're creating for Intel, these are among the largest construction projects on the planet. And as you said, this one already has a shell. We will still have 3,000 construction employees getting this thing, ready for production. They're just enormous, and the impact they have on communities is also enormous.
When it strikes me, there's some irony, perhaps. Here you have Intel, where Andy Grove, himself, a sort of a refugee and a founder of Intel, on the same time that the Federal District Court in San Francisco, right here in the Bay Area, is debating this immigration ban. And then you have Brian Krasanich, your CEO, at the White House today with President Trump. And I wonder, how much does Intel need immigrant labor and even labor from refugees around the world? How important has it been to Intel historically, and how important is it today?
Yeah, so it's very important for us to be able to hire the best talent all around the world. The task that we have, the R&D that we do, is among we're solving the most complex problems on the planet. To put this in perspective, though, you should understand, Intel is not political. We engage with Democratic administrations, we engage with Republican administrations, and depending on the issue, in some places we agree. So here we're in agreement around what they're trying to do around the tax and investment policy. In other places we disagree in issues around immigration and being able to hire the best talent, and we've made that clear to the administration as well. So we engage on issues, not necessarily down political lines. And our issues are investment, being able to hire the best talent, being able to build in the U.S. and export all around the world, and make the kinds of investments that make us a great company.
Talk to me about Intel's use of H-1B visas and how important that is to you, and if that could be simpler than it has been in the past.
Yeah, it comes back to that just simple concept of we need to be able to hire the best talent in the world. And as you know, in many cases, the PhDs, you have people that come in from overseas to get PhDs in math and science areas, and those are the people that come in and make Intel a great company. So what we'd like to see in the H-1B space is that a higher proportion of those visas are being used for the most high-skilled technical people, and it's one of the places I know that Brian's engaging with the administration to make our point of view known.
That was Techonomy CEO David Kirkpatrick and our editor-at-large, Corey Johnson. Now, a story we're following, Apple has yet again put in a request to sell used iPhones in India. This as the tech giant negotiates with the government over concessions to start production in the country. Apple's last attempt at this license was met with resistance as industry executives and government ministries believe this could undermine the Make in India program to encourage local manufacturing. Apple is exerting its brand influence at the negotiating table as pre-owned devices will be cheaper and target the price-sensitive market. Coming up, we'll sit down with AOL CEO Tim Armstrong from the Makers Conference and quiz him about his goal to have women represent 50% of AOL's leadership by 2020. And a reminder that all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are now live streaming on Twitter. Check us out. It's at Bloomberg Tech TV. It's weekdays at 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. A revolving door in tech, Zenefit's new CEO will be Jay Fulcher. He will be the third CEO of the embattled HR startup since early 2016. David Sachs announced in December that he would be stepping down from his role as chief executive. His tenure lasted less than a year after taking the reins from Zenefit's co-founder, Parker Conrad. Fulcher's first move as CEO while cutting 45% of its workforce. The new CEO announced job cuts aiming to reduce costs in the wake of regulatory scrutiny and management shakeups. And this week, we were live from Palos Verdes, California, where Makers kicked off its women's conference. At the event, AOL CEO Tim Armstrong announced a goal to have women represent 50% of the organization's leadership by 2020. He's also targeting equal pay in the same timeframe. AOL joins a push by corporate America to make the top ranks of executives more fully reflect the population. We caught up with Tim Armstrong and began there.
This journey started for us 6 years ago when we really co-founded with Dylan McGee Makers as a brand, and it was our first real investment in the women's leadership space. And we want to not just be an investor in the media side of Makers, and there's 4,500 women's stories on Makers, the largest catalog online of women's leadership stories. We also want to lead as a company in the space, and I think it was clear to us. We did a meeting with our executives and our up-and-coming women executives, and they asked us, I said, is there one thing that we could do as a company that would really send a message and be great for the company also? They said, could we get to 50-50 gender diversity at the top of the company, in the top 1,000 positions in the company? And so we discussed it. We made a commitment to it. We announced it on stage here about an hour ago. And we're in the process right now. We started a couple months ago of kind of getting the company reestablished in our recruiting and our internal employee development and the future. So by 2020, we really want to be 50-50 across the board in our executive team and the top management of the company. And it's a bold goal, but we're going to figure out how to do it.
And equal pay by 2020. Give us, if you're an entrepreneur who's watching, a business leader, the step-by-step approaches you need to achieve that.
Yeah, so we've diagnosed the issues we have around it. And I think, one, it starts outside the company with what I would call pools, where we're getting the talent from in different talent pools. So we need to reconnect our recruiting efforts into broader pools, and in some cases, pools we're not in today. So if I just went to the company and said, hey, we want to be 50-50 by 2020, and I just said, get going, let's go faster, we'd go to the same pools. We have to change what we're doing. So we've been rewiring the pools recruiting. And second is having the environment at the company. When you come in to interview, we have to represent what you think the company is in the space and what we're going to be doing. So if you're a female executive coming in, part of the interview process should be you're meeting with female executives and getting that side of the story from us in terms of why you'd want to come. And the last piece is just the internal employee development process, which is if you are diverse talent, if you're a female executive and you want to move your career along in general, we actually have to put the fundamental steps in place, which we've been doing to do that. So our plan over the next 2 or 3 years is to really put an investment, just like we bought the Huffington Post or did the TechCrunch deal or those things. We're going to do a deal around this issue, and that's what we announced on stage today. We're serious about it. Just like any other startup issue you deal with, we're going to figure out how to do it, and our employees are very engaged in it and excited about it.
Talk to me about another deal, the Yahoo deal. How optimistic, pessimistic, frustrated are you by the timeline as it stands?
Yeah, so first, let me start with the Yahoo brand and the Yahoo talent. I think that the Yahoo brand remains a brand that we care about, and many people care about in the world. The talent there, we've had a great experience with them in the integration process over the last 6 months.
And that's still going well, the integration?
The integration process has been on track. They've had the data breaches there, and so where the deal sits right now is we're waiting for information to come back from Yahoo about the second data breach and to figure out if there's any changes in value to the deal.
Timeline on that?
I think it's ongoing right now. I wouldn't want to give a timeline, but I'd assume during Q1 we'll probably have a lot more information from them, and once we have that, then we can sit down and discuss with them in a really coherent way, next steps in terms of what the outcome should be. And it's too early to have that discussion. I'm hopeful the deal closes. I think we really have a high appreciation for Yahoo overall. We just need to figure out whether or not there's been value changes, based on the breaches. That's really how simple it is.
The driver for Yahoo is to bring on more web users, to be a powerhouse, to become the number 3 player. When you're looking at mobile advertising, Facebook and Google dominate the space. How are you going to be the number 3 player? Can you be?
Sure, yeah. We bring something unique to the table. First of all, Google and Facebook in our world are gold medal athletes. They are performing well. They're executing well. You saw their recent numbers. They've done a very good job, and they continue to do a good job. The one space that we want to be an Olympic athlete in and we want to be a gold medalist is in the brand space. And we really, the same way Google cares about search and Facebook cares about social, we care about brand. And as you've noticed on the social networks with fake news and things like that, and in the search space where people have really been, it's going to more AI than it is user-directed search, brands become a really important role. So we want to be owners and partners in content brands, and we want to have a brand advertising system which really helps find new consumers for customers and push them all the way through the conversion funnel. But if I said to you simply, Facebook is social, Google is search, we're going to be brand. Everything we're doing at the company is around brand, and we're really excited about the future of advertising and brand for digital because it hasn't really been cracked yet, and we're probably one of the 2 or 3 companies in the world furthest ahead on it.
That was AOL CEO Tim Armstrong. While at the Makers Conference, we also caught up with the former US Chief Technology Officer under President Obama, Megan Smith. We asked her about President Trump's proposed visa restrictions and what they mean for luring talent to the United States.
We need to keep the pressure on and make sure that we can welcome great talent to our shores at all times like we always have through history. And it's critically important. Really, our opportunity is here. Technology, it's the time we did the artificial intelligence work for the president. And so it's becoming a time of automation, and we really need everybody, both the training and extraordinary work that's starting to happen. 35 coal miners just graduated from Code Boot Camp in Eastern Kentucky. So what are we doing to get Americans to have the kind of talent? And we did a huge amount of work around that with active, fun STEM engagement, computer science for all. 9 out of 10 parents want coding taught at school. Let's get it done, and we're getting it done. Some of the governors, very bipartisan. And then also continue to welcome the talent. So it's a 2-play. Lift all Americans and bring everybody, and pay attention in the smart way to how we're reviewing, and Homeland Security and those guys have tremendous programs where we review those coming in a way that's very, they're really capable agencies, and we just need to continue to advance the field how we do that, not ban people.
Yes, because some of the concerns is also switching now to potentially executive orders on visas, particularly the H-1B visa, but a lot of concerns have been raised about the way in which those visas were deployed. Are they being used in the right way? Are there more efficient ways in which we could be bringing in the top talent to the United States?
I think that's going well. One of my favorite, we could do even more. We're working on a modernized entrepreneur visa. Many countries have that. You see that in Britain, you see that in Canada, other places. We need to do that. We want to have those entrepreneurs making companies, making jobs here. We also, the Department of Labor, which I always think we should call Labor and Talent, they did a great program where $135 million of the fees from those visas was used for grant making to states using on TechCard to help them accelerate. Albuquerque, 4 counties represent half of the population of New Mexico. They're accelerating veterans, accelerating people coming out of prison, foster care, those with disabilities, others straight into this tech sector. Really see people go from $10 an hour to $60,000, $85,000 a year in 3 months. That's a real thing. And so exciting to see 70 different regions and growing who are making that ecosystem work with employers, training, and bringing people who have stereotypes about, oh, I don't do that tech job. Well, sure you do. Welcome in. And we have to do that because AI and automation will really drive our economic transformation, and so we need to get ready.
That's former US Chief Technology Officer Megan Smith. Facebook also made some announcements there at the conference. The company is expanding paid leave for its employees facing family hardship. Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg spoke about why.
This is personal for me. I lost my husband very suddenly, almost 2 years ago. Facebook provided leave. I was able to take it, and flexibility, which I needed. And now we're doing even more.
The new bereavement policy will also allow up to 20 days in the case of an immediate family member's death and up to 10 days for extended family. Coming up, why are VC firms waiting to hire female investors? We'll pose a question to BBG Ventures President Susan Lyne at this year's Makers Conference. Next, this is Bloomberg. A story we're watching. Pinterest unveiled what it's calling Lens technology. The feature will let users search for products by accessing their smartphone camera. Pinterest will identify objects in the picture and pull up related content within the app. The company also announced other features that help users find more products related to images users have already saved. Now, back to Palos Verdes, California, where Makers kicked off its women's conference. The message this year: be bold. We spoke with BBG Ventures President Susan Lyne. Before launching BBG Ventures, well, Lyne was CEO of AOL's Brand Group as well as CEO of Gilt Group. Take a listen.
The good news here is that women are starting companies at an extraordinary rate. We've seen 1,400 companies with a female founder since we started BBG Ventures 2.5 years ago. And obviously, that's not all of them, right?
Yeah.
This is a very fertile arena right now. The problem is that the VC world, the legacy VC world, still does not have the networks that reach into this female entrepreneur base. And so women are still getting only about 10% of the venture capital that goes to startups in this country. We looked at that and said that's an opportunity.
Yeah.
Right? If women are the dominant consumers, and there are more and more women who are coming out of not just engineering schools, but B schools, and coming out of companies where they've got real vertical expertise, we should be backing the best of these because they understand that end user.
What will be the tipping point for VCs to be able to start seeing this sort of talent coming into their own hemisphere? And because the data already proves that if you're an S&P 500 company, well, tends to be if it's female-led, it's outperforming the rest of the S&P 500. Right. What is the data not showing to the typical VC right now?
You know, I think it's less about what the data shows, because a lot of these companies are still very early stage.
Yeah.
It takes 5 years, 8 years, 10 years for a company to really show what it can become. But I think what you're seeing is that there's at least a recognition that they need to open up their partnerships. And several of the most storied VCs, Sequoia, for example, just brought in their first female partner.
But just now?
Just now.
What took so long?
You know, I think it's been a world where it's understandable on a certain level. You know, most of the early startups were selling to large technology companies. They were enterprise plays, and so being able to talk to the guys working at those companies was important. But as the world changes and as technology becomes a part of every company, there's just a bigger world out there and a bigger opportunity.
What we have seen a lot, particularly in Silicon Valley, is a lot of the key startups have been led by immigrants as well.
Yes.
How are you seeing the Trump travel ban coming into play? How much is that affecting also female immigrants as well? Is that how much of a pool in your own fund are we seeing come from outside the United States?
Well, we only invest in companies that are U.S.-based, but there are certainly plenty of founders who have come to this country to go to university, really, and stayed, and they're starting companies now. And so there's no question that this particular sector, the startup world, technology startups, would be impacted dramatically by this ban.
Are you You've spoken a lot also throughout the election cycle that perhaps there was an echo chamber, as has been voiced by many, within social media. You're now starting to see social media attack this problem. Do you think that they're becoming accountable?
I think that that everyone, whether they wanted to take responsibility for the outcome of the election or not, I know for a fact that every company really looked hard at what their current policies were, how they could make sure that that the echo chambers were opened up if that was a problem, and all of them have gone after the fake news problem as well. So I think that there's nobody is being cavalier about this. It's a problem that everybody recognized, and I think they're all doing a pretty good job of trying to find solutions for it.
We're sat here at the Makers Conference. We can hear the music, the shouting behind us of more than 500 women. It's all about leadership and storytelling within that. It feels optimistic here. Are you optimistic about the talent pool that is currently coming through? Are the STEM subjects being adopted by US youth at the moment to feed the talent pool you want to invest in?
You know, I'm optimistic about a lot of things. I'm very optimistic about this conference. You know, everybody talked about it coming in as the meeting after the march. And if you were in D.C. or in any of a number of cities around the country, it was such a spectacular day. It was one of those days that remind you of how much progress has been made and what a unified group women in the United States are, and actually women around the world right now. And the message was very simple: we're not going back, right? So I think what an event like this is great for is to get people really thinking about what's that mean in practice. What are the things we need to do going forward to make sure that that our daughters have even more opportunity. And certainly in this area of entrepreneurship where you can create your own company, that's key. It's an arena that we need more women in. Women are natural problem solvers. So you take any consumer problem out there, and there's a woman, I promise you, who is working on a solution for it. Being able to find ways for more women to understand how to use technology in order to solve problems, and then getting more VCs, more investors interested in supporting this next generation of women to do that is great.
That was BBG Ventures President, which invests in female-led businesses, Susan Line. And oh, snap, literally comes to mind in this case of a market's mistaken identity. This week, investors sent shares of a little-known startup called Snap Interactive, surging 164% in 4 days since Snap Inc. filed for a $3 billion initial public offering. Snap Interactive's, while it makes mobile dating apps, volumes started to rise in late January, just after reports of Snap's upcoming IPO. Now that does it for this edition of the Best of Bloomberg Technology. We'll bring you all the latest in tech throughout the week. Thursday, we'll hear from Cisco CEO Chuck Robbins after the company reports earnings. Tune in each day at 5 p.m. New York, 2 p.m. San Francisco, and 6 a.m. in Hong Kong. And remember, all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are now live streaming on Twitter. Check us out as @Bloomberg Tech TV weekdays. That's all for now. This is Bloomberg.